Right, I'd like to start off by thanking you, Dave, for inviting me to join this program, which I think is a very interesting one. And it's a sort of invitation for your own personal, this is your life. Now, I'd like to start at the very beginning. I was born in February 1935 in the city of Dortmund in Germany, to parents Robert and Irmgard Sternberg. Times were pretty difficult during the latter part of the 1930s, especially for the Jewish population in Nazi Germany. And following Kristallnacht in November 1938, my father was incarcerated together with thousands of other fellow Jewish males in Sachsenhausen. He personally went to Sachsenhausen concentration camp near Berlin. He remained there for 6 weeks until he and the others were released. In February 1939, we sailed for Africa in the Usukuma, which was a German passenger liner, leaving, of course, mainly elderly relatives behind, who all unfortunately perished in the Holocaust. After 6 weeks on this voyage, we landed in Beira in Portuguese East Africa, and thereafter made our way by train to Salisbury. Initially, we stayed with my mother's elder sister and her husband, Martha and Julius Philipson, in a house in 2nd Street, Salisbury, and they had immigrated about a year earlier. Eventually, my father found employment with a Mr. B.S. Leon, a well-known businessman, in Eiffel Flats, in a shop. Eiffel Flats is the headquarters of the Cayman Motor gold mine, which is roughly 5 miles from Gatooma. My mother found employment in a small place called Darwindale, north of Salisbury, as a governess for the children of a Mr. and Mrs. Pichanik, whereas I remained behind in Salisbury under the care of my uncle and aunt. For one term, I was placed in the convent, in the nursery school section of the Dominican convent in Salisbury. I recall that the nuns there, the teachers, were mainly German, and they delighted in talking German to me during that period there instead of talking English. So my English didn't improve by continuously talking in my, at that time, home language. My father could speak English. He had studied that at school, and my mother was learning once she realized where we were heading for. That was a case of finding a job where you could find a job. He was actually offered one in Bulawayo, but that was a little too far away, so he turned that one down, and thank goodness found one shortly thereafter in Eiffel Flats. Now, he tested into the Rhodesian Army in 1943, serving as a warrant officer in the camp in Gatooma. They were yeah, it was close to Gatooma, and they were guarding the Italian internees that had been brought down from East Africa. And at one time he was deployed to Mvuma as accounting officer there, and then eventually in 1946 he was discharged from the army. Well, that was the problem. He was classified really as an enemy alien because he didn't have a British or Rhodesian citizenship, and that's why he was the accounting officer for the internment camp, which was actually a commissioned officer's job. The previous one had been a lieutenant, but he could get only as far as W01 because they didn't have non-British people in the officers' side. So he remained a warrant officer But anyway, that was fine. And during the period, during the war years, I attended Jameson School, and most afternoons I cycled down to the local airfield in Gatooma and watched all the training aircraft landing and taking off again on their cross-country flights. And that's where my interest in aviation honed in. And over the years, I've, thank goodness, been able to travel a bit and attended major air shows at Farnborough, Paris Air Show, Pensacola Air Show in the United States, and several others throughout the world. And that interest has remained to this day. Well, I did start a hobby in 1960, early 60s, when I discovered plastic kits, and I collected them over the years, and I have amassed up to now about 700 models, of which 350, half of them, are in a special aviation gallery at the Gatooma Library. And this exhibition was opened in 1981 by Group Captain Leonard Cheshire, VC, who was Britain's top bomber ace of World War II. He happened to be in Rhodesia for a couple of days. He was the founder of the Cheshire Homes, and he flew down especially to Gatooma to open this exhibition. So that's something that is still there on display. Right now, in 1947, I was sent to Salisbury to attend Prince Edward School, because Jameson School at that time didn't have high school status, and I wanted to carry on in my education. So I landed up at Prince Edward School and was boarded at Jameson House, one of the 3 hostels at Prince Edward. Within a year or so, I found myself as the only Jewish boarder amongst a total of some 250 boarders on campus. Anti-Semitism was virtually non-existent. It did exist. I first encountered that at Jameson School, but we got over that. That wasn't a major irritation. At Jameson, I played rugby for Jameson. At Prince Edward, I played rugby for Jameson House, and also was boxed in the school championships for a number of years. I regularly attended Shabbos morning services at the old Salisbury Street Synagogue, which were conducted in those days by Rabbi Morris Converser. And I do recall that on quite a fair number of Saturday morning services, we got to a stage where we couldn't continue with the service because there wasn't a minyan. So the service was stopped. Rabbi Converser delegated 1 or 2 members there to go and find a few Jews living nearby. There were quite a number in those days. And after about 15 minutes, they sheepishly, they brought in a couple of sheepish-looking people, and the service continued. This is something that I don't think many people recall. Despite the population of Salisbury, Jewish-wise, there obviously weren't enough people interested in going to shul on Shabbos mornings. And we complain about that today, but in those days, the problems were there as well. So that was, and they lived in that area too, near the shul. But anyway, so that was something I do recall. Now, I left Prince Edward at the end of 1951, having graduated as such, and joined my father in his accountancy practice. Gatooma, despite the fact that it was a small town, had a lot of things to offer, and I joined the tennis club and the dramatic society, and eventually took part in in plays and even produced and directed a couple, and became treasurer of the society for many years. Now, at that stage, the Jewish population of Gatooma numbered around about 60, men, women, and children, all included. My father was instrumental in founding the Gatooma Hebrew congregation, and after much fundraising in 1956, he conducted the Friday evening services, the Yontif services, including Yom Kippur, and in addition, he taught Bar Mitzvah to most of the Jewish boys living there, and he Bar Mitzvahed them himself, whereas my mother taught Hebrew to the majority of children. As much as possible, he still had this, at one stage he was still, of course, working in the army, and he had to go down on Saturday mornings, so that couldn't be helped, but otherwise they were shomrei as much as they possibly could be. Now, in 1953, he was elected to the Gatooma Town's Council and served as mayor on 3 occasions of the town. The first Jewish mayor that Gatooma had ever had. And in addition to his municipal services, he was also interested in politics, and at that stage, and became chairman of the local committee of the party. And I well remember at one stage Sir Roy Walensky coming down to have meetings with him, and the meetings were held at our house. He also served at one stage as a member of the think tank to Sir Edgar Whitehead, who was voted out of power when the Rhodesian Front came in. He was a founder member of the Rotary Club and served as president on a number of occasions. He even attended a Rotary Club meeting on board the QE2 on the way from Southampton to New York one year, and conducted the Friday evening services on board ship, as he had done on the Usukuma way back in 1939, and for that matter had also done Friday evening services, if you can call them that, in the concentration camp in Sachsenhausen, with a couple of lookouts to make sure that no Nazi guards were patrolling around. He passed away in 1992 and is the last person to be buried in the Gatooma Jewish Cemetery. My mother passed away in 1986, the second last person to be buried in the cemetery in Gatooma. Now, to get back to me, I joined Round Table in 1960 and served as chairman on a number of times, and also represented Rhodesia at a world conference of Round Table in Melbourne in 1971. When I retired from the movement in 1975 due to the age limit, once you turned 40, that was it. I found that I was a longest serving Round Tabler in the country at that particular time. Now, on a visit to Europe in 1961, I met my future wife, Hermoine, in London. Our friendship clicked from the start. Hermoine was born in Kroonstad in the Orange Free State, grew up in Witbank. When I told her at the time that I'd only vaguely heard of Witbank, she answered quite breezily, "That's okay, because I've never heard of Gatooma." That same evening we went to see Agatha Christie's play The Mousetrap. The trap was well and truly sprung, so it really was a case of meeting in London, getting engaged in Edinburgh, marrying in Johannesburg in July of the following year, and then bringing my bride to Gatooma, which was a bit of an anticlimax to her after the big cities.